Welcome back guys, hope you all doing great. And today's in this video we are going to understand the use effect hook in the React. So we are going to learn how to use the use effect in a more efficient way in the development and in the production, and we are going to understand the different usages and purposes of the React use effect hook from the beginner level to the advanced level. So here we have an empty React application. So first, we need to understand what is useEffect hook in the React. So basically, useEffect hook in the React that lets you to run some side effects in the function component. So we have a function component. So let me bring some. Let me open any notes or something. Okay, so let me bring it. Okay, so first you need to understand what is the use effect. That's the important questions, right? So what is the use effect hook in the React? So use effect is the is a React hook that lets you to run some side effects inside your functional components. Note that point, inside your function component, not inside your class component. Okay, so here you need to understand what are those side effects include. So those side effect includes fetching the data from the from an API, subscribing to an events, and updating the main DOM elements, and setting up the timers and intervals, and mostly cleaning up the resources. So these kinds of actions and the events are performed inside the use effect, right? So here you need to understand first the syntax of the use effect. So basically a syntax of a use effect is use effect, E should be capital, and it's a function. Inside that function it's going to take two different parameters. The first parameter is going to be an arrow function, and the second parameter is going to be the dependencies. This is basically the syntax of the your use effect hook, right? So here, like, when you're working with the use effect, the most important stuff that you need to understand is when does this use effect run. That's the most important stuff you need to understand. So basically we have this empty dependencies, right? So inside this arrow function only we do all the actions based on the events, or subscribing the events, or cleaning up resources. All those things will be performed, and this dependency is defined when it needs to run and how many times it needs to run, and like those actions, the time durations, like not the time durations, these dependencies define those the number of times. Okay, so let me show you. So the first of, let's run this application. So use effect, let me import that. Please make sure the package is import from the React, and let's bring the arrow function. And this time I'm not supplying any array dependencies, right? Without array dependencies, if I run this application, let's say console.log running inside the use effect, something like this. Okay, if I save this application and if I refresh this, you should be able to see the use effect is performed two different times over here, right? So don't worry about this. I will explain why the use effect is running two times, and not in the production mode but only on the development mode. Why it is running two different times, I will explain it at the end. So stay tuned and watch the complete video. Before that, we need to understand all these stuffs related to the use effect. Then I will answer this question. This is the most common interview questions that you can find at any interview when you're facing the interview for based on the React, right? So let's discuss that part at the end. Okay, so this is the syntax. Now you can see it's running, and we can see that console log on the client side. So how does it run? So this time I didn't give any dependencies. So over here you can see we have the dependencies arrays, and when it runs, so basically if you don't supply any dependencies, if I didn't supply any dependencies, what happens? It runs after every single render. Okay, if any state changes happening inside that particular component, it is going to rerun that use effect again and again if you didn't supply any dependencies. But if you are supplying this square bracket as an empty square brackets, so it is going to run only once, when only by the time when the component did mount on your DOM element. Okay, And if you're supplying any value in it, which means if that particular value changes, then it needs to rerun that particular dependencies, that use effect again. So the cleanup functions, when you're working up with the cleanup function, when the component gets unmounted or when the components getting mounted again, so at that point this use effect gets rerun again. Okay, these are the changes that happens every time if you're supplying your array dependency injections over here. That's based on that value. This will get runs again and again and again and again. Okay, fine. So now uh, like this is basically the beginner approach for understanding how does the use effect it work without no dependencies, because basically it's not recommended, right? So but if you supply a single, this will run only one time, right? So the most important thing that you need to understand, if I don't supply this empty array, so the problem it's going to be it runs on every state updates inside the component. That will cause the serious performance issue, right? So what happens if I supply this empty dependencies? Use effect with the empty dependencies, that's the most common for the first time for the beginners every time they work with the API calling, right? Calling an API, right? So let's try to work on the API calling over here. Okay, so for that I do have an API, I do have a project over here. So if you want to build a full stack multi-store application, so I drop the link in the description so you can go ahead and look into this project. So I'm going to use this free API over here. So I'm going to copy this, and if I copy this API, and that is going to give me a complete data, right? This is the data, that's the data I want to receive inside over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this. Okay, then I'm going to write a function to fetch. Okay, so mostly what happens, so I'm just going to directly write the API over here, fetch, paste the API. Okay, then inside this fetch method, right after here I'm going to get this dot, then dot catch if there is any error. Okay, so we are going to get that error as well as, so error, then I'm just going to say console.log whatever the error it is. If I get the response successfully, then I'm going to send that response in the JSON format. Okay, once it's successfully written, I'm going to collect the data from it. Then I'm just going to say console.log whatever the data I do received, I have to print the data over here. Okay, this is the basic stuff that we are going to do. Now if I refresh this, see, okay, so we are getting an API error. Okay, my bad. So that the API it's showing as the cross origin issue. Okay, fine. So maybe because of the cross origin that the API it's blocking inside the React application. So don't worry about that. Simply search for JSON placeholder.typecode.com or simply search for JSON placeholder API. So they give you a free API to check with that. Then I'm just going to replace this API just like that. Okay, so here if I run this, see, we are getting that user data, and we are the basically based on that ID we are getting the user data from that specific API, which means that the API and this code whatever we have in our hand, it's working. So this is the beginner level approach, right? So what happens over here, what exactly happening over here? So when the component mounts, this use effect is going to run. So if it is getting run, the data is being fetched and it's being console logged over here. Okay, this is beginner friendly. There is no error handling in here, no loading state in here, and there is no cleanup functions also in there, right? But okay, so let's say instead of this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the dynamic string literals. Then I'm gonna change this like based on the ID. Okay, so here I'm gonna have the use state, which is basically going to be an ID, set ID. By default it's going to be 1, and every time whenever the ID gets changed, this needs to be rerun. Okay, this needs to be rerun. All right, so right after here what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a button. This is, let's keep it as minus, and here I'm just going to print the ID inside a span tag, which is the ID. Let's print the ID. And for, oops, this needs to be button, and the type of the button needs to be the button itself, and inside this button, which is going to be minus, and here I'm just going to change it to plus. So what I'm going to do, on click, whenever I'm clicking this function, I'm going to collect the callback function. Then I'm going to say set ID. I'm going to collect the previous value, whatever I stored in the ID. Then I'm going to say previous value minus 1. Okay. So the same goes over here. On click, every time whenever I click that function, I'm going to get a callback function to run it. Then set ID, you call that set ID function to update the state value, collect the previous value. Then inside over here, I'm just going to say previous value plus 1. Save it. Now we have that. Okay. So once I refresh it, I'm getting the data, right? The reason is because by default the state value is 1. Now if I change the value to 2, the useEffect will get rerun because the ID value gets updated. So I'm getting the newly updated value, right? So whenever there is a changes on the useEffect, this particular ID, so that value is supplied inside the array dependencies. So the dependency value gets changed. So this useEffect value get rerun. Okay, this is useful mostly for the dynamic pages, right? So basically this doesn't have any error handling, any stuffs, nothing, right? So what we can do is, since we are using the fetching an API, so basically the API needs to be an asynchronous operation. So what we have to do is, I'm just going to remove this ID we here, and I'm going to cut this out completely. Then I'm gonna get a function const fetch data. I'm gonna put a function inside that. Then I'm gonna create as an asynchronous arrow function that makes sure that function is an asynchronous function. Then I'm going to paste it. So here basically what we are doing, we are receiving the response, right? So instead of using this, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to say const response equals to await fetch. We are collecting the response in a separate variable. Then I'm going to set that data over here. Data is equals to, I'm going to use await response dot JSON data. Okay. Then I'm just going to simply say console.log data. Whatever the data we are receiving, we are going to console it. So close it. And here I'm just, instead of supplying the ID, I'm not going to supply any ID. So let's refresh this. This doesn't work because we haven't called that function. Inside the useEffect itself, you have to call that function. Now if you refresh it, you can see we are collecting 200 data objects, right? So why we have to keep a function inside? useEffect callback cannot be an asynchronous function. This callback function, it cannot be an asynchronous function. So that's the reason we have to keep an function inside, which that function can be an asynchronous function to perform the asynchronous operations, right? This is the best practices for the beginner level. Now let's try this with an advanced approach. Okay, so now let's move to the production level pattern, like how we can do that. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to create myself one more variable called set is mounted is equals to, I'm going to assign that value as true. Okay, so then we have this fetch data function. Inside this function, I'm just going to literally cut everything. Then I'm just going to say we are going to have one more state, which is going to be use state snippet loading. Let me bring that loading. By default, it's going to be false. So inside over here, inside the fetch data, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to bring the try and catch. This is basically the exception handler for to handling the runtime issues and everything. Inside the try, I'm going to say set loading. By default, it's going to be true, right? Inside the catch statement, if there is any error is happening, what we have to do, we have to set that error as well as. So I'm just going to say use state snippet error, set error, and by default it's going to be an empty string. And here whatever the error is going to happen, I'm just going to say set error I'm going to bring the dynamic string literals. So here, failed to load the data. And what is that main error that is caused? So we have to print that error. Okay. And inside the catch finally statement will be executed both the try after successfully executing the try block and after executing the catch block as well as, right? So here I'm just going to say set loading as false. Okay. Now inside, right after this set loading, this is the place where we are going to call that the data and everything. And here I'm just going to close that. So here what I'm going to say, if is mounted, if that value is true, only the component is successfully get mounted, then I'm just going to do this stuff. What we can say, I'm going to create use state post, and then I'm just going to keep an null value in it. Here I'm just going to say set post. I'm going to assign that data into it. Okay. So by the end, we are calling that function. Then right after here, return, I'm going to have a callback cleanup function, open it. I'm just going to assign the is mounted value as the false value. So save it. Okay. So now if I run this application, because we don't have any console.log, and here I'm just going to say if it is loading, then I'm just going to simply display the text inside a span tag, which is going to say loading. If it is not loading, then I'm going to bring that the post. I'm going to check one more condition, which is going to be bring a empty react fragment. Here I'm going to check one more condition. If the post and the post dot length, if the length is greater than 0, then I need to render this. Okay, what I'm going to render, I'm just going to simply say post dot length. That's it. Okay, so currently we are getting the text as, so let me hide this one. So we are getting the text as post as 200. Now if I refresh this, you can see a glimpse of text saying loading, and we are displaying the text as the 200, right? So basically what happened here is, so this will prevent the state updates even after the unmount. Okay, so this approach prevents the data states getting updated after the unmount, and this is how they usually handles the real world scenarios. Okay, so this is all about how to work with the API functions and working with the cleanup as well as, right? So this is the best approach for working with the real case scenarios. Now let's talk about like cleanup functions, how they are handling the event handlers, how we can handle the event handlers when we are working with the useEffect functions. Okay, so here I'm going to create myself one more useEffect function, open it, a callback function in it, open it. Inside over here, I'm going to have an empty array injection. Then here, I'm just going to say const handle resize, the window resize. Okay, it's going to be a callback function. This just going to console log the value whenever the window get resized. I'm going to access the inner width of that window, then I'm just going to print it. That's it. Okay, then right after here, I'm going to add an event listener for the window. Indo.add event listener. What event listener we are trying to do? Resize. Sorry, not resist, resize. Whenever I'm resizing it, it needs to call this handle resize function. So supply that functions as the reference. Then by whenever this comp get unmount, I need to clean up this functions. So here I'm just going to say remove event listener, open it. What event listener we created? Resize event listener, and supply that function as the reference. Okay, so this is how you can work with the cleanup function. This is how you need to set up the cleanup functions. So the cleanup runs when the component gets unmounted, right? So if I refresh this, okay, and if I see adjusted the screen, and you can see we are getting the console.log on our screen. Okay, so the reason we need to keep this resize this written statement for cleaning up, it's because to like what say, to avoid the unnecessary reruns. That's the reason. So this event listener can cause a series of performance issue if you're not handling it properly. That's the most important stuff. Okay. uh yeah, so the like previously we discussed about this one, right? Like a best approach for the real case scenarios, right? So in order to prevent an unnecessary API calls and all those stuffs, we can use the abort controller, right? So that's the advanced stuff and the recommended stuff when you're working with the real case scenarios. So let's see how we can work with the about controller. So I'm going to pass that one. Okay, I'm going to pass it. And here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the use effect hook one more time and bring the array injections in it. Then inside over here, I'm going to create myself a controller. Controller is equals to new abort controller. New abort controller. Okay, so here the new abort controller, it's basically what we say. So let's understand the abort controller first. So abort controller, it's a browser API that allows you to cancel on ongoing asynchronous operations like the data fetch. Like, let's keep it in right mind for the time being. Okay, so then we can understand the difference between why we have to go for abort controller. Okay, so I will explain that part, but for the time being, you just try to understand abort controller is a browser API that allows you to cancel an ongoing operations like the fetch. Okay, so now what we can do is, using the abort controller, we already created that abort controller. Then we can keep this. And here I'm just going to bring this, copy it, and I'm going to put it over here. And okay, this time I'm not going to use any wait. Okay, so this is going to say dot, then I'm going to collect the response, then I'm just going to return the response.json out of it. Then I'm going to use this one more handle that promise, because it is going to return a data promise. Then we need to handle that data properly. So I'm just going to say set post as the data. Then right after that, I need to handle the error as well as, so dot catch, let's say get the error. Then I'm just going to say set error, get that error and assign that error into it. Okay, so here, instead of directly setting it into it, open it. Let me command this function. Okay, open it. Inside over here, what I'm going to do, if I need to set the error, if the error dot name, if it is not equals to abort error, if it is not equals to abort error, then only I need to set that error into the error state in order to set it, because otherwise user aborted that fetch. So how can we print that as an error? So that's the reason, right? Then at the end, I'm just going to say return equals to controller dot abort. Okay, so this is the safest approach and the production ready approach and the strict mode compatible. Okay, this is how you can use the data fetch when you are working with the production level approach. Okay, you can still see we are getting that data fetching over here. Okay, which it will works because we are using the abort controller for canceling the ongoing like what is it, ongoing data fetch as well as. Okay, so yeah, so what's the difference You need to understand the difference between these two, right? Why we need to have the abort control. We all know that abort control is a browser API that allows you to cancel an ongoing API asynchronous operations, right? So think of it like this. So when you're using the fetch, what happening? That will start a network request, right? So abort controller is a remote control. So why we need that remote control? To cancel that ongoing fetch, right? So abort is the function that helps you to stop that action, right? So why I need to use the abort control? In the real problem it solves, right? Without abort controller, what happens? API keeps running even after the component gets unmounted. That's an issue, right? And the states also get updated even the component gets destroyed, right? And the React shows the warning signs, and memory leak happens at that point. So the duplicate requests keep on triggered inside the strict mode. These are the things that happens with this situation. Okay, so when you're using the abort controller, right, when you're using the abort controller, what happens? See, these are the stuffs gets happen. So you can cancel all the API calls, so that stops the unnecessary network request. Then we can prevent the memory leaks, so no states gets updated even after the component get unmounted. Okay, and it will handle in strict mode. So safe, and basically it's a safe double execution. So useEffect gets runs 2 times inside the strict mode on the development mode, right? So it will improve the performance by avoiding unwanted network usages. So it has a clean error handling functions because abort error is expected to run in that specific way. Okay, that's the beauty of using with this abort controller and all those stuffs. Okay, so I hope you guys understand the differentiations of working with the use effects, and we learned some stuff about that from the beginner to the advanced level stuff, right? So in this case, earlier I said the use effect gets run 2 different times, right? It will get 2 different run, uh, right? So on a development mode, the use effect gets run 2 times, right? So this is the very common React interview questions. You should be ready when you're for React interview. This is the most very important question that will cost commonly in the interview. Why does the use effect run twice in a local host? That means development, but not in the production. The same code run 2 times in the development mode, but not in the production mode. The short answer is, in development mode, React intentionally run the use effect twice when the strict mode is enabled to help to detect the side effects and the unsafe code. In production, this extra execution is removed. That's the answer. That's this one-line version, right? So the real reason, the important concept behind this is the React strict mode. In development only, the React strict mode, whenever you create a React app or a Next app, strict mode is enabled by default in the development mode. Okay, that is because if you check your main.jsx, you can see the strict mode is enabled over here. Strict mode affects only on the development. It does not run in your production environment. Okay, so what exactly happens in the development when the strict mode is enabled? So React intentionally does the following sequences, like the components mounts, and first the component gets mounted, use effect runs, then the cleanup function get runs, then component mounts again, the use effect runs again, right? This happens only once and only in development. Okay, so these are the stuffs that gets intentionally run by the here. These are the stuffs gets run intentionally run in the development mode. So why React does this? That's the important question. Why we need to do this stuff? So React wants to detect some side effects like the bugs early itself, such as API calls without cleanup functions and the memory leaks inside the use effects and mutating the external variables and the subscriptions which is not cleaned properly, and effects that depends on the render order. So if you're having a multiple and unhandled rendering, it causes a series of memory performance issue and memory leaks. So React simulates the mount, unmount, mount to verify the use effect is safe to run it. The effect is safe to run. So what is the react simulates? So the react simulates. First, what happens? It will get the mount, then it gets unmount, then it's mount again. That's how the in the development mode it gets work. Okay, so this is the core reason. These are the core reason, right? Let me bring that core reasons as well as these are the core reason. This is the core reasons: API calls without cleanup, memory leaks, mutating external variables, subscriptions, and the effects in the defense order, right? So that's the main reason that the use effect is running 2 times in the development mode but not in the production mode. The reason is because of your strict mode. Because of the strict mode only, it is running twice in the development mode. All right, so I hope you understand the most important key details about the use effect hook. And if you have any questions or regarding this, or if I explain anything wrong, so please don't hesitate to point out in the comment section, and I'm happy to correct myself and learn it. And if you have any questions or doubts or anything related to the use effects or any kind of React concepts, please drop the doubts in the comment section. I'm happy to help you out. All right, so stay tuned. We are coming up with the lot of interesting concepts in the next videos.